The March of Prophecy is an overview of God's interaction with man from the very beginning of time until the end of all things and the beginning of eternity future. What we are studying today in the March of Prophecy is not just history. It really is his story. The fact is that when you begin to really read the 66 books made up in the Bible, when you begin to read the 40 authors that make up those 66 books, when you begin to realize that those 40 authors wrote those 66 books over a span of 1,500 years, then you begin to realize that there's one saga, there's one plot with a purpose. It's history, yes, but it's history that's going someplace. Because in each slice of his story, the character of God, who is the real author of the book, the Bible, each of those unfolding chapters give to us a display of the character of God that is simply wrapped up in the fact that there is deliverance for those who believe and obey, and there is judgment for those who are disobedient. That's why I'm absolutely sure this afternoon that the beginning of all of our understanding of this great overview of what God is doing and has been doing in sequential order, a panoramic view that God is at work among his people. I say that God is at work among his people even in the best of times as well as in the worst of times. You see, there was not only deliverance by the people of God, by the hand of God from Egypt, there was also the crossing of the Red Sea, a great miracle in itself. Yet, on the other hand, there were 40 years following of the wandering in the wilderness. Not only was there victory at Jericho, but there was also the conquering of the land of promise. And that necessitated the struggle with the enemy, as well as the military leaders that God brought to surface, who were then the so-called judges. So in all of this, we can begin to see that as God working among his people continued, that there was not only the glorious kingdom days of, well, David and Solomon and the building of the temple by Solomon in the city of Jerusalem, but there were also some very unfortunate times or difficult times in that same period of time called the period of the dispensation of the law. You see, Israel, hard to believe, but these chosen people who had been so miraculously delivered began to drift carelessly away from the law of God. The law that God had just given them on Mount Sinai, written by his own fingers. They gradually began to drift until, yes, they became idol worshipers. Israel forgot God, and because of their transition into a neglectful life from their relationship with God, judgment came. It came first in a way of discouragement and despondency and confusion until discord set in the governments themselves or the tribes themselves, until, as you remember his story, there came a split. A time when the 10 tribes of the northern part of Israel split away, and the 2 tribes on the southern side of Israel, the south end, they also began to split away. Because they moved away from God and were disobedient, obviously, God sent judgment. So those 10 northern tribes were taken away into Assyria, and about 130 years later, that is 130 years after the 10 tribes had been taken to Assyria, 2 tribes remaining were captured and taken into Babylon. At that time, this great, magnificent temple was destroyed, not one stone left upon another. When you read that segment of history, or his story, you can't help but ask, why did God allow this to happen? His chosen people to be captured and taken down into Babylonian captivity. Well, we found out in our preceding studies that righteousness comes only to those who are obedient to the will of God by someone who also has the ability to be disobedient. Blessings were promised to Israel, but they were promised to an obedient people, and when they broke the law that God had given, then they were taken into bondage. With them, some of the great men of that time, Daniel and Ezekiel. These men were taken down into Babylonian Empire in captivity for a period of time as a result of God's judgment upon their lives.